So, brothers and sisters, elders, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I must start with a thank you for inviting me to share my thoughts at perhaps one of the great congregations in the Southern Hemisphere. This mosque and this congregation are well known in this country. You represent an inspiration to many parts of the Muslim community for the stances that you've taken over the years, for the ability to host a series of incredible lectures, for representing perhaps the best traditions and the best values of Islam. And so I want to thank you for honoring me with this invitation to come and share my thoughts on this Jummah occasion. I must start with a little sense of trepidation. I must qualify myself. I'm not an Islamic scholar. I am, if you like, a secular academic who's been given the responsibility to speak before the Jummah Salaah and the Jummah Khutbah at perhaps one of the most progressive congregations in this country. And so I do it with a little bit of humility and with a little bit of thanks for you honoring me in this way. What I want to do is reflect a little bit on this Friday on something that is basic to our religion, but also to human existence. And it really is the principle of balance. A balance between giving and taking, a balance between rights and responsibilities. My father, who's passed on, often used to speak about balance. When I was younger, I must say I truly didn't appreciate it. But those wisdom of those words echo in my mind frequently in these days. It is often said that the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam often spoke about the importance of eating modestly. What he spoke about is if you wanted to be healthy, you should eat in a way that your stomach was 1/3 full with food, 1/3 with water, and 1/3 with air. And implicitly in those words is the lesson of balance. Today, we all, Muslims and those outside our community, have forgotten this simple lesson. And it is truly at the heart of much of our challenges as a world, as South African society, and as a community itself. Let me speak initially about our country. We live in very, very dangerous times in this country, but around the world as well. We truly live in perilous times. Our economy is in the doldrums. Our public institutions have all but collapsed. And as a South African community, we are as divided as we ever can be. Not only have we had a decade of looting, but we have also had a decade and slightly more of utter incompetence. You see, we often speak about the corruption of the Zuma administration. This is true and a problem. But even worse than the corruption of this administration was its incompetence. We might have lost 100 billion rand as a result of corruption. We lost over R1 trillion as a result of the incompetence. Our public institutions, Eskom, Transnet, the latest South African Airways, all are on the verge of collapse. You see, the problem with the Zuma administration is not only did they steal, but they exclusively focused on the looting that they forgot the principle of sustainability. That even when you steal, there must be something left to steal. Otherwise, you destroy the possibility of your own stealing. You see, in a perverse way, they didn't understand the lesson of balance. The question I want to ask, however, is how did we reach here? How did we come to this point where somebody like Jacob Zuma could have been the president of this country? And I want to speak about the core structural challenge of our society and perhaps our world. You see, if you ask me, what is the real problem of our society? I will say it's inequality. Poverty is a problem. Don't mistake it. And it is important, it's a moral necessity to address poverty in our society. But you see, inequality is a political necessity to challenge, for it goes to the very core of why we feel unhappy as a society. Poverty is when we do not have enough to sustain the livelihoods of a decent life. Inequality is when some people have so much and others have so little. And part of the people who have so little is precisely as a product of those that have so much. Now you see, in the last 25 years, we've brought down poverty in our society. At various moments, we did bring down poverty. But for every year of the 25 years we've been here, we've increased inequality. And let me tell you why inequality is a problem. It's not because of economic reasons or statistical reasons. It is a problem truly in social and political terms. You see, our sense of satisfaction, we are happy or we are sad and angry in relation to others that we know who are our reference point. Each one of us doesn't go and read statistical indicators from South African statistics to determine whether we're happy or not. We are happy or sad and angry when we see those and how those around us live. And that's why inequality is dangerous. Because when you see somebody have so much that they have nothing to do with it, and yet others are starving and can't put food on the table for their children, then you get angry. And it is why we're such a violent society. You know, I travel a lot in my job. I travel all over this continent, in societies that are far poorer than South Africa. When I go to Dakar in Senegal, or to Addis Ababa in Ethiopia, or to Gaborone in Botswana, or to the multiplicity of places on this continent, Abuja in Nigeria. When I'm in the evening, I'll walk those streets. I'll go to a restaurant and find something to eat. And I'll do it on myself. I would never do that in any of our cities in our country. And the question is, you can do that in those societies because yes, they are poorer, but they are far less unequal. But when you live in the city I live in Johannesburg, and you sit in the township of Alexandra, you cannot but be angry when you look over the bridge and you see Sandton. Because when you see Sandton, you see, I have so little because they have so much. And that makes you angry and that inequality creates the violent society that we have become. You see, inequality also does something else. Not only are we violent as a society, we've also allowed ethnic entrepreneurs in our midst to emerge. Politicians who claim to represent the poor, but all they do is they want their turn to loot the coffers of the state. And what they do to get to the state is effectively use what are real divisions in our society, what are real concerns in our society, to attack the other politicians, but they, in the process, try and divide us. Now, I've never heard the kinds of racism in our public discourse in this last year. The last time I heard such kind of discourse was in the late 70s and early 80s. Since the late 80s, we as a community, collectively as South African community, we're embarrassed to say racist things. Now politicians emerge every day and say some of the most outrageous things that would make Hendrik Vervoet proud, that these are the products of his thought. And that is possible because people are so angry in our society. They've become so angry that they've allowed people from a multiplicity of parties to come to the fore and to use rhetoric, political rhetoric, to divide us as a human community. And that has created a new round of politicians. We got rid of Jacob Zuma, but there's a new crowd of political gangsters that have emerged, and they're looting VBS, all in the name of socialism and progressive politics in our society. They're not from one party, they're from multiple parties. So the question we have to ask is, how do we get out of this mess? Again, the principle of balance is important. We are a society in trouble, and we're not going to get out of this mess unless all of us, rich and poor, workers and bosses, the collectivity of us, are prepared to learn the importance of balancing our short-term and our long-term goals. Let me use the example, and I know I'm going to get into trouble for this, but let me use the example of the recent SAA strike. What we had were unions demanding above inflation increases in a context of an institution that was technically insolvent. Now, how can you lose that? What you're doing is you're demanding 6, 7, 8% increase when you know the institution is technically bankrupt. How sensible is this? And this is not an exception. This is happening in institution after institution in our country. In universities where I work, I can tell you now, our unions have gone rogue. They're increasingly demanding salaries and conditions that are way in excess of inflation and are in the process of compromising the very mandate of our universities themselves. I'll give you one example. In 2015 and 2016, in Fees Must Fall, we insourced workers legitimately because they were outsourced. The poorest of our workers would work in the gardens and cleaning, and they would earn terrible wages. We insourced them largely at the prompting of the student protests. But when they came in, since then, from 2015 to 2019, in 2015, they earned a horrible 3,000 rand a month. 2019, they earned 9,800, a 300% increase, more than a 300%. Even then, we constantly are under threat. We constantly have above inflation increases. Now, frankly, I'm not against giving it. But if giving it compromises the very mandate of the university, it fundamentally erodes the sustainability of our institution. All of us lose. Like is happening today in South African Airways. But this is not only a problem about money. Let me take the example of fees must fall, a struggle that I was caught in the center of. There is no doubt that the cost of fees had become too high. What had happened is for 20 years, government spoke about free education, but every year they cut the subsidy to the university. In 1994, 80% of our budgeted WITS was paid for by government subsidy. By 2015, it was less than 40%. And as they dropped the subsidy, we had to increase the fees to maintain the quality. So the students were absolutely right to protest. And they were right to say that the fees have become too high. Something had to give. But in this struggle for free education, can we legitimize the burning of buildings? Can we legitimize the burning of our universities? You know, not very far away from here, at CPUT, what our students did is they took guards and locked them up in a building and burnt it. All in the name of free education. All in the name of a freer and better society. How is that legitimate? There is a debate today happening on Radio 702 and many other radio stations about a young student activist who's been in prison. He burned a police vehicle and was given 8 years, 5 years, 8 years, 3 suspended. So effectively 5 years. And what student leaders are saying is actually he should be allowed, he should be let go because it was a progressive struggle. But yes, that's the logic that I fear. However legitimate your struggle, is it legitimate for you to do the violence onto others, to hurt others, to burn in the name of a progressive outcome? Because you can't say we want to deal with violence in our society. We want to deal with our sisters and our children being killed every day in this city and in many other cities around. And then you can't say, I hate that violence, and at the same time proceed to act violently when it's your cause and you think it's legitimate. You see, if we're serious about dealing with the violence in our society, then we have to learn when we struggle, legitimate struggles, to also engage non-violently. You can disrupt, you can be angry, but that doesn't mean you have to kill and you have to maim. Now I want to be clear. I'm not suggesting that this young man must not be considered for amnesty. Our religion and good societies everywhere are defined by the principle of compassion and mercy. But compassion and mercy must be balanced also with the principle of accountability. You see, in this case, one must and can consider amnesty, but only if there is an acceptance of accountability, an acceptance that violence is wrong, and that this is not acceptable in a democratic society. The principle of balance is important. Let me end with us as a Muslim community. The principle of giving is enshrined in our community. But to many of us, we think that our obligations are only to the Muslim Ummah. I go to mosque after mosque. I hear religious leader after religious leader say, our obligations are only to the Muslim Ummah. Sorry, I don't believe it. We do have obligations to the Muslim Ummah. But we also have obligations to the broader society in which we live. You cannot belong to a society and then say, I only have obligations to those who pray like me. We have as much a responsibility to our fellow human beings as we have to our fellow Muslims, and we need to be explicit about this. We should not allow any child to starve in our society. A Muslim child, a Christian child, a Jewish child, a Hindu child, a child of atheist parents, a child that is black or white, or all of the mixes in between. No child should starve. And if there is a child starving in our society, our heart should bleed irrespective of whether they are Muslim or Christian or Jewish or Hindu or any of the multiple faiths of the human community. We have to come to realize that we practice our Islam through our commitment to being human. You can only practice Islam when you are truly part of a common humanity. They are indivisible, being Muslim and being human. And we need to be explicit about this. Even in the heat of the emotion, even in the heat of struggle, even when we're angry about what's happening in Pakistan or the Middle East, we must never forget our principle of a common humanity. So let me end by saying this. We can all read Salah. We can all fast. We can all perform all of the Islamic obligations that are upon us. But if we do not imbibe the real essence of our religion, to show empathy, to love our fellow human beings, and to practice balance in our lives, we will never have learned to be truly Muslim. And in the process, we will never be able to heal our society and our world. We have a society with many ills and many pathologies. The only way to heal it is to go to the real essence of what it means to be Muslim. Yes, it's important to read namaz and fast and fulfill all of our obligations. But in the essence of who we are part of a common humanity. We are meant to demonstrate a way of life. And I want to say this, only when we do that, when we understand balance, when we understand that we belong to a common human community, that we must empathize with all. We must bleed when anyone in our society suffers. Then only will we learn to heal our society from its ills and its pathologies. May we all have the courage to live the lives we expect of others. Assalamu alaikum.